This week in Hockey East, we're going to learn a lot in a couple of crucial matchups in the non-conference, and we really get into the thick of conference play here. Plenty to come on this episode of This Week in Hockey East. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Hockey East. Eric Galanti and Bridget Prue with you. We have a non-conference game to talk about for our Friday Night Hockey East on Nesson Slate. And it is the Quinnipiac Bobcats playing host to UNH. This game was crucial last year for UNH. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's just start with this New Hampshire team, Bridget, who hasn't played a lot so far. So I think we're still kind of figuring out what this version of the Wildcats are.
Yeah, just 2 games under their belt this season. So like you said, not a lot to go off of, but there have been some standouts early on in this season for them. We'll get to in just a second. UNH is coming off a shootout loss in their only conference game against Merrimack last weekend. It was just a 1-game weekend for them, and that game went into a shootout, tied 0-0. Jared Whale got his first shutout, technically, even though UNH ended up losing the shootout, but his first shutout as a Wildcat nonetheless, and he's had some great numbers this season. He's coming in as a junior transfer from the University of Alaska Anchorage. He started both games this season, an overtime win against Bentley as well as that shootout loss to Merrimack, and he's only given up 1 goal through 2 games. Great numbers, a 0.47 goals against average and a .975 save percentage. That's the best goals against average and save percentage in Hockey East.
Wouldn't it be amazing if UNH found lightning in a bottle again out of the transfer portal? It's kind of a unique situation in goal for UNH. Remember Jakob Helston, who was so good, especially down the stretch last year, ended up being one of the best goalies in Hockey East. He wasn't really starting the season after coming in as a transfer from North Dakota, but kind of earned his way into that job. And then all of a sudden he signs with a professional team overseas a little bit late in the game. So Mike Sousa said, they had to scramble a little bit. They did have Jared Whale in. They're able to bring in another goalie, but it's kind of amazing that, we thought going into the year this would be a question, and all of a sudden Jared Whale's been really good so far. And part of the thing that UNH did last year that was so crucial in helping Helston, Bridget, was they just gave up so few shots, right? They were 4th best nationally in fewest shots allowed. So far, similar story, right? Just 39 saves he's had to make in 2 games so far. So perhaps a similar story, but yeah, kind of amazing what we've seen in goal.
Yeah, he's had a great start so far with a new team. And another thing that UNH has been dealing with early on has actually been a few injuries. And that includes to Ryan Comey, who played his first game against Bentley, had a goal and an assist in that game, but then last week missed the game against Merrimack. He led UNH in goals and points last season. And so it's not considered to be a serious injury, though. And it's not expected to sideline him long term, and he could be back in the lineup as soon as this weekend. But some other notable injuries for them, Cy Leclerc and Nikolai Jensen haven't played yet this season, both players that could help the offense on this team. And Eric, this is going to be UNH's first game against a ranked opponent this season. Quinnipiac, though, just dropped from number 7 to number 11 in the USCHO.com poll after last week.
Yeah, getting swept at Maine, certainly nothing to be too ashamed about, but they do drop a little bit. And remember early last year how big those ranked games were for UNH. It felt like it just sparked the whole season that UNH had. Remember, they beat number 1 BU, basically that first home game of the season, 6-4. And then the next week, the split with Quinnipiac, as we said, up at the Wit, but the 5-4 overtime win in game 2. Cy Leclerc, who you mentioned, scored the game winner against number 4 Quinnipiac, the defending champs at the time. So I'll get another 2-game series here with the Bobcats. And because of those 2 losses against Maine, I think we still don't quite know what this Quinnipiac team is going to be. 1-2 start to the season. They also have a win against Penn State. They have some old Hockey East friends on this roster that folks will recognize. Jeremy Wilmer, who was really good for BU the last couple of years. He scored twice in the win against Penn State. Aaron Bollinger, who is at UMass. Charlie Letty, who is at Boston College, also on this Quinnipiac team. The thing I think we're going to still in a wait-and-see mode is, how is this team going to score without Colin Graff? He was so important to everything that Quinnipiac wanted to do the last couple of years, especially offensively. Now that he's a piece you have to replace, just at least something to watch here early in the season. But as we said, it is going to Maine, and we're going to talk about Maine later in the show, losing 2 1-goal games, by the way. It's not something you bump on. The one thing that I did bump on a little bit for them They allowed 6 goals in that second game. That's the first time Quinnipiac allowed 6 goals in a game since March of 2022. Remember that NCAA tournament game where Michigan scored 7 against them. So that's at least something to watch. Still have a couple of guys rotating it in goal. But, I think we're going to learn a lot about UNH this week. And I think that's going to be the theme of our show today. We're going to learn a lot about some of these teams, right? Sometimes you don't play those great games early in the year. Sometimes you do, and we still have to figure out what it tells us. And the biggest part of that is the road here for UNH. Last year, the road was a struggle. 6-11 in away games versus 14-4-1 at the Wit. So can they go down to Quinnipiac? Can they get a couple of results? I also just thought it was worth noting we're a long way from this, but these early season games so important for UNH. The back half of their hockey schedule, Bridget, is brutal. 10 of 13 games from January 17th to March 1st are against last year's Hockey East Final Four, BC, BU, Maine, and UMass. So they need wins early. Non-conference is obviously important, and that should be a good one. We'll see it Friday night, and then a weekend series wraps up on Saturday between Quinnipiac and UNH. And it's just the first of a bunch of big games on the slate, both in the non-conference and the conference. When we come back, we'll zoom in on a conference game that we'll have for you on Saturday on Nesson when, speaking of UNH, the women host UVM. We'll have that and plenty more coming up on This Week in Hockey East. Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. Coming up on Saturday in the Nesson slate, the second of a 2-game weekend between UVM going on the road to take on UNH, Bridget.
Yeah, so we'll take a look at UNH first. They're looking for their first conference win this weekend against UVM. Both games will be played at the Whittemore Center in Durham, New Hampshire. And Saturday's game will air at 3:30 p.m. right here on Nesson. And though the Wildcats are 3-0-1 in non-conference matchups so far, they are 0-2 in games against Hockey East opponents with 2 losses to number 9 UConn. Not necessarily the easiest way to kick off your Hockey East schedule with that ranked matchup with the defending Hockey East champions, UConn Huskies. But special teams so far for UNH has yet to give up a power play goal this season through 6 games played. That's a perfect 14 penalties killed. However, their power play is second to last in the conference, just 9%. So something to work on for them this season. And once again, goaltending a strength for this UNH team in net. Sedona Blair, once again, the Wildcats' #1 goalie. Her 1.55 goals against average and 942 save percentage are both ranked second in Hockey East. And Blair's workload could be lessened a little bit this season after she played all 36 games in net for UNH last year. And just crazy, she played 98% of the minutes in net for the Wildcats last year. It seems like she'll be getting a little bit of more of a break this year. UNH head coach Hillary Witt said sophomore Nomi Martinez is going to get a little bit more of an opportunity this year to take some minutes, relieve Sedona Blair, and in terms of the minutes and workload that she had last year. And so Hillary Witt saying that Nomi Martinez really improved over the course of last season. She likes where her game's at. And so as a whole, goaltending is once again a strength for the Wildcats this year.
Yeah, I think this series is going to have goaltending being a really big theme of it. Obviously tough start here for UVM, but they did just get their first win of the season in a series split against number 7 St. Lawrence, a 1-0 win in game 1 on Friday. Laura Beecher's first period goal kind of held up thanks to 36 saves from Jane Gervais, including 16 in the second period and 11 in the third. They also had the 2 1-goal losses to Merrimack, where, maybe you flip that and we're maybe having a different conversation about UVM so far. But the one thing that UVM's done really well so far that could be an advantage this weekend is the face-off. They're over 57% this year. That's 7th best nationally and best in Hockey East coming into the weekend. That was not a strength for UNH last weekend. They were below 43% in both games against Union, but we'll see if UVM could take advantage of that because obviously UNH, it wasn't a problem for them against Union. We mentioned Jane Gervais. It's kind of an interesting story. Even made 33 saves in game 2 on Saturday. She's a grad transfer from Wisconsin. Folks will know she started for the Badgers most of the Friday games last year before they split time with Ava McNaughton in game 2 last year. And then eventually McNaughton was basically given the starting job and took Wisconsin all the way to the national championship game where they lost to Ohio State at the Whittemore Center, by the way. So she goes into the transfer portal, comes to Vermont. goalie who's played in a lot of big games over the course of her career. Can she find a way to steal a game maybe here or there? That's going to be an interesting thing to watch, because when you have a goalie with pedigree like that, she starts to get in a little bit of a groove. 30 saves each of the last 2 games against St. Lawrence. It'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend. But I think the goalies are going to be big keys in a game that looks like, at least on paper, to be on the lower scoring side, but should be an exciting matchup between UNH and UVM.
Yeah, definitely tune in for that. Once again, 3:30 p.m. on Saturday to watch that game. And when we come back, we'll take you around the other matchups in Hockey East right after this. Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. It's time to take you around Hockey East this week, presented by Boston Harbor Hotel. Visit HockeyEastOnline.com for your chance to win championship tickets and a 2-night stay at the Boston Harbor Hotel. And Eric, kick us off with the matchup between Maine and Northeastern.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this matchup. I think this is such a great example of what we talked about. Early conference matchup. We're going to learn so much about both these teams. Often when you get a team that does well down the stretch, you look at an early season result that maybe even didn't go their way, but you kind of can note how they learned something from that. And it feels like that weekend out at Denver might very well be that thing for this Northeastern team, right? They dropped a pair of 5-2 games Friday night. Probably could have even been worse than that scoreline. Shots were 45-17. Saturday could have even been closer than that scoreline. It was Northeastern down 3-0. They came back to 4-2 before an empty netter made it 5-2. But, I thought what Jerry Keefe said after the game was a pretty good quote. He said, "I thought we got better from last night to tonight, and that's a really good sign. But it also shows right now Denver's the standard, and we're trying to get to that standard," right? Thanks to Maddie Wasserman for putting that quote out there. He does a great job covering Northeastern. So can they learn from it? Can they take what they need to take out of that game? They fell behind early. They gave up too many shots, but can you learn something against the number 1 team in the country? I think that's going to be fascinating to watch. And considering the fact we've talked so much, Northeastern has to get off to a better start than they did last year. Well, their next 4 weekends are Maine, Providence, New Hampshire, and BC. So now's the time. You can have a similar stretch to what they did last year, where they went kind of 1-10 to start Hockey East play, even though they have some good competition. So can they learn the lesson out of the weekend and learn something from Denver? And then Maine, what a dream start here, right? Top 10 sweep of Quinnipiac. We talked about Quinnipiac earlier. They take 2 1-goal games. But in terms of what are we going to learn? Can they do it away from Alphon this year, right? First game on the road. Last year, Maine was 13-2-2 at home. They were 10-10, as good as they were, 10-10 in 20 games away from Alphon last year. So what a great chance early in the season to see what this group has with 2 games at Matthews. I was really impressed with how Maine outshot Quinnipiac so much. They were +9 and +14 in those 2 games. Quinnipiac was only outshot by that margin once all year last year. By the way, it was to Maine. So that was certainly impressive. And what a weekend for Harrison Scott. He's our night shift all-academic standout. 5 assists on the weekend, including 4 on Saturday, and he won 27 faceoffs in 2 games. So dream matchup here, Maine at Northeastern.
Yeah, and I have UConn and UMass this weekend. They'll play a home-and-home series starting Friday at the Mullins Center and then in Storrs, Connecticut for the Saturday game at Toscano Family Ice Forum. Both of those puck drops at 7 p.m. UMass has had mixed results in its non-conference schedule. They have a win over Air Force and a loss to number 15 to Omaha, Nebraska and Las Vegas, as well as a weekend split against Sacred Heart last week. And the Minutemen haven't lacked offense, though, so far, averaging 4.2 goals per game. Leading the way with 5 goals is Russian sophomore Aidar Sunyev. And Sunyev also led UMass last season with 12 goals as a freshman. So coming in and doing more of the same here as a sophomore. And in net, Michael Rabel has all 5 starts for the Minutemen this season. His numbers are slightly down from last year, but still hanging around the numbers that he had in what was a successful freshman campaign for him. For UConn, the Huskies have a 3-2-0 record with a perfect 3-0 home record, but no wins on the road yet. So that game on Friday, a chance to get in the win column for them on away ice. And the Huskies, who lost their leading goal scorer last year, Matt Wood, are now led by Jake Percival and Jake Richard, who both have 4 goals this season. UConn also saw a major turnover in net. Ethan Heider and Arseny Sergev both leaving the program, and now They bring in junior transfer Tyler Muslick. We also saw Tyler Heaney, a freshman, have one start against number 3 BU. Not really the easiest way to start your collegiate career against the Terriers, the way that they're built this season, but he stepped in with Muslick dealing with a minor injury. UConn head coach Mike Kavanaugh said he's hopeful Muslick will be back soon.
Yeah, I thought Heaney did a pretty good job considering that it was kind of a late scratch and that he had to play that game against BU. UConn was in that game quite a bit against BU on Friday. So can they continue to build on the offense they've had so far? And for UMass, you mentioned Michael Krabel. He's, the consistency thing. That's the thing that Greg Carball's mentioned to us, right? The highs are really high, but can he be that consistent guy? We saw maybe a little bit of a struggle against Sacred Heart on Friday and a nice bounce back in game 2. So fascinating conference matchups all across Hockey East. When we come back, we'll talk about a couple of non-conference matchups we're looking at on This Week in Hockey East. Let's continue around Hockey East on This Week in Hockey East. Let's talk about some big non-conference matchups, starting with the Terriers, who have 2 massive games against North Dakota.
Yeah, this one is a matchup I'm really excited for. A top 10 matchup, number 3 BU, number 7 North Dakota. It's not the first Hockey East ranked team that North Dakota has played. They got a 5-2 win over Providence when Providence went all the way out to North Dakota. This game also will be on the road in Grand Forks, Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern time and Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern time if you're looking to tune in to that. And it'll be the first road trip of the season for the Terriers. They've so far played 3 regulation wins at Aganis over Holy Cross, Union, and UConn. And Cole Iserman is off to a really good start. We talked about him in our preview episode about maybe him being able to come in and replace some of that scoring from Macklin Celebrini. While he hasn't disappointed so far, he has 4 goals through 3 games played, and Iserman was named Hockey East Rookie of the Week for his 2 goals against UConn last Friday. But in net, Mathieu Caron has a 3-0 record, a 1.67 goals against average and a 947 save percentage. So on par for where he's been in his career with the Terriers. And for number 7 North Dakota, they got their first loss of the season last weekend when they split against number 20 Minnesota State. North Dakota is getting scoring from spread throughout the lineup. No with too many goals yet, but it's coming from up and down the roster. And their power play is clicking already. 43%, 3 power play goals on their 7 opportunities. So if you take a penalty, they've been able to make you pay in the early parts of this season. And in net for them, TJ Septenfelter has both wins. Septenfelter had his 3rd collegiate team. He started out with Northeastern, transferred to Arizona State, finished up his degree there, and now with North Dakota as a grad student.
You mentioned Iserman. We talked about it on the broadcast on Friday if you were with us. And, one of the things Jimmy and I were saying was everyone knows about Iserman's shot. And I think that's the thing that jumps out on the scouting report. But what's been really impressive, and J.A. Pandolfo said this, is he's not just settling. He's getting to the net. He's putting the defense on their heels. We saw a couple of his goals directly result from that in the game against UConn. So he's a fun player to watch. Another non-conference matchup to watch on the women's side, Clarkson, another big-time test for Boston College. They got number 1 Wisconsin earlier this month. Now they get number 3 Clarkson. The numbers are literally ridiculous for Clarkson. Some of that's the outlier weekend against St. Michael's where they won 9-0 and 14-0. It skews things a little bit. But still, they've outscored their opponents 41-3 so far. They've outshot their opponents 334-65 so far. 15 different players have at least 4 points already in the season, and they're also the number 1 face-off team in the country at over 67%. BC got a win they needed, though, against Merrimack. They fell behind in that game 1-0. Gabby Royce scored a power play goal in the second, and then Jade Arnone with the game winner in the third. Couple of positive trends for the Eagles in these 2 wins in a row. 3 for 11 on the power play after an 0 for 11 start in their first 4 games. Also more power play attempts the last 2. They've been really good limiting shots outside the Wisconsin weekend. Under 19 shots per game in the other 4. Can they do that against Clarkson, though, who has this unbelievable offense? That's what we're going to look for and try to see this weekend for BC and Clarkson. Couple of good non-conference matchups. It's great when these big-time programs play each other at this time of year. It gets the excitement going for college hockey season. We're going to finish up with some short shifts when we come back on This Week in Hockey East. Welcome back. It's time to take some short shifts presented by the Shift Group, helping former athletes and veterans become elite business professionals. Bridget, what stands out from the week that was?
Well, so I want to get to our Jersey Mike's a sub above Women's Player of the Week, and I think that it should go to Callie Shanahan this week. BU's number one goalie decided on before the season. She's coming back from a year last year where she missed a chunk of time due to injury, and she looks like she's completely healthy again. So she is coming off a weekend where she has 2 wins in net over Maine, which included a 2-1 win and a 2-0 shutout. She stopped 37 of 38 Black Bears shots this weekend, and that makes her our Jersey Mike's a sub above Women's Player of the Week.
Just quickly, I want to talk about another big non-conference game we didn't have time for earlier. The Boston College men, they're going to take on Western Michigan on Saturday. Sort of, you can almost call them non-traditional opponents here for BC. They're going to have Western in one game on Saturday and then 2 on the road at St. Cloud next week. We'll talk more about St. Cloud next week in our show, I'm sure, but they're kind of play different ways than maybe we're used to seeing in some of BC's non-conference games with the, Michigan States and Denvers and so on and so forth of the world. So I'm interested to see how this plays out. And on our theme of we're going to find out a lot, Western Michigan, that totally fits this. Because look, so far through 3 games, they're tied 2 nationally in scoring at 5 goals per game. They have the second best faceoff percentage, 62%. They're 43% on the power play so far. They're 3 for 7, but they've also been really good 5-on-5. 12 goals scored 5-on-5, only 3 allowed. Boston College pretty dominant last weekend, both against AIC and then in the exhibition against the national team, 5 goals in the first period. Give credit to Will Vogt, who missed basically all of second semester last year, got hurt, never really was able to get back, but already he scored 2 more goals than he did all of last year. He had just 1 last year. It feels a lot like the jump that Oscar Jelvik took early last season, where all of a sudden the numbers kind of blew away what he had done in his career so far. So they've been very good offensively. And then, of course, Jacob Fowler, who had 3 shutouts all of last year, already has 2 this year, 945 save percentage in 3 games. So interesting matchup Saturday. One note, both teams completely stayed out of the penalty box this year, just 5.3 penalty minutes per game. So does the power play even become a factor in that game? It'll be interesting to watch in just the one-off on Saturday.
Well, thank you to everyone for tuning in to This Week in Hockey East. Stay tuned for UNH against Quinnipiac. It's time for Friday Night Hockey on NESN.